In this video I'm going to show you how to make my tie pattern. So we have 3 pieces here with the tie. We have piece number 1, which is the top piece of the tie, and how the tie is made is that we fold over the fabric, we stitch it, and then it flattens down to create the tie. So hopefully you can see the red arrow there, and that's 7.5 centimeters or 3 inches. So that's the width, the finished width of the tie. Now if you want the tie to be wider, it's very straightforward. You just cut up the tie, keeping the, I'll just move these out of the way, keeping the top section attached there, and just equally spread out the tie there to make it wider. Now if you want the tie narrower, you can just cross that over, and of course you would just reshape the V at the bottom there in the centre. So cross them over equally and reshape that for a narrower tie. I'm going to keep the tie as the pattern, the basic pattern. So we have the first piece there, which is the top piece of the tie. We then have the second piece here, which is the pattern under piece, so the tie under piece, and that will sew to the tie here, and then to create the long length there of the tie. And we also have a facing piece there, or just a lining section that will line the back of the tie, and you'll see that as we move through and make the tie. So you can see here I have my very vivid fabric. I also have a nice light fabric here, a kind of cotton organza for the lining, so I'm just going to put that for the facing piece. So we cut our tie pieces on the bias, so I'm just going to pop these on here. Actually, I'm just going to move that on. I only need 1 piece, so I'll cut this out as a single layer, and it's up to you depending on how much fabric you want to save. I'm going to cut possibly 1 there and 1 there, and just be careful to make sure that they're perfectly on the bias there, and that you have the, if you have a print like this, and you can see that because I'm deciding to cut on the bias that's going down the centre of the tie, I can do a double check as well, fold that over and just make sure that the centre of the tie or the print is going where I want it to go. So I'm going to choose one of the spots there and just line all the centres of the flowers up there, just to be perfect there, and then I just might move that up as far as I can, so still in line with the centre of a flower and a centre of a flower. And then when I'm happy, I'm just going to pop those down and then cut my other piece as well, which is just slightly different there, because this is the back of the tie. And then when I'm happy, a weight on there, and I'm going to cut out. I'm also going to cut 1 piece in my lining, and this is very light. I've gone ahead and cut out the 2 tie pieces. I'm just going to cut out the tie lining, and just to remind you to cut this as well on the bias grain. So have that on the bias there. Just going to weigh that down and cut out my lining piece. Okay, so I have my tie lining. My main tie section and my under tie section, so just one of each piece. So let's just so the first thing we need to do is to take our tie main section here and our tie under section, and we're going to put them together like that, flip them over, and we're going to stitch this seam here. So from where they join there, from there to there, I'm going to stitch along there to make one long tie piece. Okay, so I've sewn this seam here. I'm just going to trim the overlaps of the seam allowance there, so you can see the join, or probably can't see the join because it's on the bias. It's really hard to see a diagonal seam. So now we come to the tie second section. So this is section number 1, the actual tie piece, and the section that we joined on, that's the tie under piece. So what we need to do here is to fold this over so that you just overlap there. So you're going to take 1/2 centimetre or 5 mils or a very small seam here to just, and we're going to bag this out once we've sewn it. So I'm just going to go off and sew that seam there. Okay, so I've sewn this here. You can see there's a little overlap. If you want to just trim the excess seam allowance off there, you can. So just use your thumb inside there, fold it over and then turn through. And you can give a very gentle press. I don't over press ties because it just flattens the life out of them. So you can press that gently to get a clean edge there. So what we are going to do is we're going to fold this tie in half and be very gentle with the tie because it's on the bias, and particularly if you're using a silky fabric that really stretches, and just be really careful. And I'm going to eventually get to the end here, but we need to face this section now. So I'm going to take the lining section here and then pop the right sides together, and I'm just going to stitch this and bag this section. I'm going to leave these edges open. All I'm stitching is here and here. Okay, so I've stitched here to stitch the facing on, so I'm going to go in again, just fold over the corner and just pop it through. Just make sure I've got a nice point there. and then I can go and just gently press this tie. Now you can see hopefully that it has life because it's cut on the bias, so I'm just very gentle with everything I do when I'm creating ties. So I'm going to press that. So we're ready to now fold this tie in half here, and I'll just clip this to show you. And we're going to stitch all the way along this edge. Now I haven't inserted a tie lining section. If you're working with a very light silk or maybe something that's really springy and very lightweight, you may want to put a lining piece in there, and I've given you the guidelines for cutting that for the tie. And basically it's the same as the tie, but just within the stitching line here, and it only comes to here, and it could be a very thin piece of gauze or just something to give the tie stability. I haven't done that with this tie because it doesn't really need it, but it would just come to here as well. So just a lining section, and it's indicated on your tie pattern where to cut that. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch now the full length of this tie, making sure that I don't pull anything, that I'm really gentle when I stitch and I compress it, because I don't want to put any weight on this tie or handle it in a rough way, because you're just going to stretch a piece of fabric that's very fragile because it's cut on the bias. You may want to bind this edge, or I've just neatened mine and turned it under, and you may want to finish this edge as well. They are tucked inside, but if you have fabric that frays really badly, you may want to think about that. So my tie is now stitched all the way along, and now I just need to turn that through. So I'm just going to turn that through, and again, be as gentle as you can with this. I don't tend to press, but if you want to, if you feel that you want to, you can go along just with the very tip of the iron, or even just with the warmth of your fingers, and just use the warmth of your fingers to just flatten this down so that your seam remains open. In fact, I will do that. And again, it all depends on your fabric and how it's behaving. And it is okay to press this bottom section here. And again, you may want to neaten these edges. They are all inside, you don't see them. But if your fabric frays, then you may need to. The warmth of my fingers is enough, because I don't want to flatten the shape of the tie. So I'll just turn this through. So the tie is completely turned through now. I just need to go along and just make sure everything's sitting really nicely. The facing sections, just Just make sure that they're nice and flat. And I just use my hands to go along and just, I use the warmth of my hands to just set the seam as I move along, because you do want some life in the tie, you don't want to flatten it so it's completely flat. You do want some life and body. So generally the warmth of your hands is enough to just work with the tie. When you get to the ends, just make sure that they're sitting nicely and nice and flat. If you want to, you can just hand stitch the ends and just hand stitch here to keep that down. And sometimes wearers like to have a loop at the back here to be able to tuck the back of the tie in. So if you wanted to, you could add a loop. You probably do that before you stitch this long seam. So there we have our tie complete.